Welcome to part 5 of our series on Azrienoch's book, The Perpetual Wound. In this part, we'll be covering material from paragraphs 3 and 4. And I think the best way really to introduce the subject matter of these paragraphs is by telling you a story. I call this story the parable of the unconnected switch, and this is a true story. So back in high school, I had this friend who, by the tender age of 15 and a half, had become the world's foremost authority on bullshit. And yeah, Scott, if you got the big ears on, this one's for you. So Scott had this guitar that he really wanted to move, but it was kind of a crappy guitar, so he couldn't get the price that he wanted on it. So, did Scott let this limit him in any way? No, of course not. What Scott did was he went down to Radio Shack, spent 25 cents, and bought a big, impressive-looking toggle switch. He came home, he mounted this toggle switch on the front of his guitar, and next to the toggle switch, he stenciled in a very impressive name for it. He called it the psychoacoustic attenuator. Now, mind you, he didn't actually connect this switch up with anything. This switch was totally unconnected. It was unwired. But if you turned it on or off, it made a nice resounding clicking noise. So, next time a stoner came over to look at the guitar, Scott had a new pitch for him, right? He said, "This is a very special guitar. This is a one-of-a-kind. No other guitar in the world has a psychoacoustic attenuator." And when the stoner wanted to know, well, what really does a psychoacoustic attenuator do? Scott was happy to demonstrate. He would turn the switch off, then he'd play a riff on the guitar, and then he'd turn the switch on and play the same riff, and wow, what an amazing difference. The stoner was just blown away, and was more than happy to pay about twice what the guitar was actually worth. Like I said, Scott was the Obi-Wan Kenobi of bullshit. And as you can imagine, he went on to have a very successful .com career. So, with that story in mind, let us read the first sentence of paragraph 3 of Azrienoch's book. If whatever we care to accept is acceptable, why does it matter what we accept or why we accept it? So you can kind of see what Azrienoch is asking here, right? If I accept or if I don't accept something, does that really matter at all? Does that connect up with anything? Or is it kind of like the unconnected switch, which was the psychoacoustic attenuator? Another way of phrasing this question is, what significance does it have, really, if I accept or if I reject something? Does it mesh with the rest of reality, or is it just completely a loose wheel? So let's think about this. How would you even answer a question like that? What philosophical tools could we bring to bear to give us an edge in solving this? Well, because you've been doing the homeworks and watching along on the other lectures, you know that one of my favorite philosophical tools when analyzing propositional attitudes is to compare and contrast one propositional attitude with another. So let's see if that method will actually help us out here in this particular problem. So, which propositional attitude should we compare and contrast the accept-unaccept dichotomy with? Well, what could be more important than the truth? So let's compare and contrast accept-unaccept dichotomy with the true-false dichotomy. And not coincidentally, that's exactly what Azrienoch does in paragraph 4 of his book. So in paragraph 4, Azrienoch spends a lot of time drawing a distinction between the accept-reject dichotomy and the true-false dichotomy. They are by no means identical. And if I think this very small, vest pocket example will do a good job of illustrating why. So you let X be the sentence, people are discriminated against. X is true, but it is unacceptable. So as you can see, just because I accept X, that doesn't mean X is true, and if I don't accept X, that doesn't mean that X is false. There's a distinction to be drawn between these two propositional attitudes. But even though these two propositional attitudes aren't the same, they're not identical, does one constrain the other one? Are they completely disconnected from each other? How could we tell something like this? Well, one way to do it is to see if we can, change our acceptability or unacceptability about it. Consider the following sentence. Fred is cutting your stomach open with a knife. Now, at first blush, this sentence seems quite unacceptable. So let's ask the question, can we make it acceptable by making some other sentences true? So what if I do this? What if these sentences were true? Fred is a surgeon, a world-renowned specialist. You have a tumor in your stomach, and Fred can cure it with surgery. All of a sudden, a sentence which we thought was unacceptable suddenly becomes acceptable. So you can see that even though acceptable, unacceptable is not the same thing as true and false. They're not completely disconnected from each other either. This isn't just like the psychoacoustic attenuator case. So we've shown in one direction at least, the true-false dichotomy imposes constraints on the acceptable-unacceptable dichotomy. But can we complete the loop? Does the acceptable-unacceptable dichotomy also determine, in part at least, what is true and what is false? Well, that's such a good question that I'm going to leave it for the homework. So this is homework set number 2. Can you give an example of where something's being acceptable or unacceptable will determine whether something else is true or false? So the first question here basically asks you to complete the loop. Second question is kind of interesting. So we've seen that being true, the things that are true and false will constrain what is acceptable or unacceptable. But we got to ask now, how tight is this constraint? Can you think of a sentence S which you cannot choose to make acceptable or unacceptable? Or can you always freely choose for any sentence S whether you accept it or not? Is whether you accept something or not, is that really a matter of reflective choice or free will or not? Or does the what is true and false so tightly constrain you that you really have no choice as to whether you accept S or not? So do spend some time thinking about these homework problems, and it's not like there's a right answer or a wrong answer to any of these. I'm mostly interested in what your thought processes are. How would you go about, breaking these questions down and really trying to figure out what good answers to them would be. And please do write up a few paragraphs and share them with us so that we can discuss them together. We'll be going over some of the answers in episode 6 of the series, so I'll see you then.